Good afternoon, everyone. We are delighted to inform that as part of Symbiosis Golden Jubilee celebrations, Symbiosis Law School Noida, in association with Anand and Anand, has organized a webinar series titled Knowledge Series on Law, Intellect, and Property. There are 4 sessions, out of which 2 sessions have already been delivered on the previous 2 occasions, that is October 10, October 17, and today we are on session number 3. There are 2 topics which would be discussed. First, understanding pre-litigation mediation under New Commercial Courts Act, and second, shifting paradigm in criminal, civil, and custom enforcement of IP during COVID-19. We are delighted to inform that we have a panel which is well known not just for their intellectual capability, but for bringing the professional acumen to this side of law, refers as law, intellect, and property. We have among us Mr. Saif Khan, partner, Mr. Manish Biala, partner, Mr. Achyutan Srikumar, partner, and Mr. Shobhit Agarwal, managing associate at Anand & Anand, as the panelist. Today's session would be moderated by Mr. Karan Bhutani, senior associate, Anand & Anand. I would now hand over the baton to Mr. Karan, and I would request him take over the podium. Thank you very much, Mr. Karan. Over to you.
Thank you for your kind words, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Karan Bhutani, Senior Associate at Anand & Anand, and I welcome you all to the 3rd session of this knowledge series on law, intellect, and property, where we will be discussing on the aspects of pre-litigation mediation under the Commercial Courts Act, along with 3 major forms of enforcement under IP litigation, that is criminal, civil, and customs enforcement, and how it has evolved in the COVID times. I thank you all for being a part of this webinar and for making the last 2 parts of this webinar series a huge success. I would also like to thank everyone at Symbiosis Law School Noida for their efforts of conducting this very knowledgeable series that is helping our audience learn about various aspects of law during these times. As a ground rule, I would like to suggest that please keep your audio to mute and your video cameras off while the session is on. In the end, there will be a question and answers round, and everyone will be given time for that. Today, as our speakers, we have with us 4 very eminent and experienced professionals from Anand & Anand. Allow me to give you all a brief introduction. Firstly, we have with us Mr. Saif Khan. Mr. Khan is working as a partner with Anand & Anand in the litigation department and heading the white-collar crime practice and IP enforcement team of the firm. He completed his schooling from Sherwood College in Nainital. He is a commerce graduate from Symbiosis College of Arts and Commerce, Pune University, post which he pursued his law degree from Jamia Millia Islamia University. Mr. Khan has a vast experience of handling contentious criminal matters relating to corporate frauds and technological frauds. Prior to Anand & Anand, he was working with British Petroleum on the roles of Castrol India Limited for nearly 2 years as the manager legal trademark operations. He has also practiced as a trial lawyer during the initial 4 years of his practice. He also has on-ground experience of strategizing and conducting IP enforcement actions both under civil and criminal law. Then we have with us Mr. Manish Biala. Mr. Biala is also working as a partner with Anand & Anand in the litigation department and heading the customs enforcement team of the firm. Mr. Biala is a commerce graduate from Sri Guru Gobind Singh College of Commerce, Delhi, and thereafter completed his law at Delhi University. Over the time, he has developed active and rigorous customs enforcement practice and has curbed the entry of various counterfeit products in the Indian markets. He has an expertise in custom enforcement and has worked with various luxury brands on custom matters throughout India. Before joining Anand & Anand, he was a legal practitioner with the criminal law bar practice for almost 4 years. He regularly appears in contentious matters before various courts and custom offices all over India and has been presenting major Indian and international brands. We also have with us Mr. Achyutan Srikumar. Mr. Srikumar as well is a partner with Anand & Anand in the litigation department. He completed his law from Hidayatullah National Law University in the year 2008 and has started his career in the firm handling matters involving traditional IP such as trademark, copyright, patents, etc., as well as borderline IP issues such as tortious issues, hyperlinking, spamming, defamation, information technology, etc. Over the past few years, he has been focusing on expanding the firm's practice to a range of subjects, including white-collar and IP crime, and represents a number of business conglomerates and individuals who have faced issues in this regard and have obtained favorable results. Last but not least, we have with us Mr. Shobhit Agrawal. Mr. Agrawal is a managing associate with Anand & Anand in the litigation department. He completed his BSc and law from Gujarat National Law University and enrolled as an advocate in 2010. Since then, he has worked exclusively with clients for the protection and enforcement of their IP rights and extensively for brand protection, software piracy, and anti-counterfeiting measures. Mr. Agrawal regularly represents clients in contentious matters before various courts in India and has a wide experience in conducting civil and criminal litigation, trials, and enforcement actions. I welcome and thank the speakers for their time here today. Now, since the topics of discussion today revolve majorly around pre-litigation mediation and IP enforcement, it will be best to begin with pre-litigation mediation. The name itself is very self-explanatory, and it can be understood as a consensual process whereby the plaintiff and the respondent come together to settle the dispute amicably between themselves with the aid of an impartial adjudicator before the institution of a suit or even before sending the notice to the court. A proper codification of the concept of pre-litigation mediation in cases of commercial disputes can be found in the Commercial Courts Act 2015, where later by an amendment in 2018, Section 12A was inserted that specifically formed a provision for pre-litigation mediation. To understand this further, I would like to ask Mr. Sri Kumar that in comparison to a civil suit, why would an IP owner opt for a pre-litigation mediation instead of filing a normal civil suit and seeking an injunction? And what are the benefits of pre-litigation mediation?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Pre-litigation mediation is different from a normal lawsuit in various counts. First of all, it is impartial and it is without prejudice communication, so you can talk your hearts out. There is when you go to court, you specifically ask for a certain injunction order, saying that, for example, if you take an example of an IP dispute, you request the court on the basis of your facts to pass an order injuncting the opposite party from misusing your trademark or copyright. But pre-litigation mediation, if you go, it is not just you can ask for a variety of things which might not even be contained in your plaint. So that is one aspect. So when a settlement, sometimes when in a pre-litigation mediation, after the mediation, when the parties come out, the infringer turns out to be an authorized or becomes an authorized dealer of the right holder. So a lot of various options can be spoken, and you can it opens a big huge box, Pandora's box, and you can come up with various solutions. And in court, it's always focused here. It's very wide and ambit. Second, pre-litigation mediation is very cost effective. That is one very important thing. Plus, it is everything is without prejudice and consensual base. So you are not bound by what you say there. You can, once you come out, and if there is no settlement which has been reached into, once you come out, you can go back and then fight out your lawsuit whenever, in whichever manner you may deem fit necessary.
Right. So
these are I feel these are the main advantages of a pre-litigation mediation: cost effectiveness, confidentiality, accessibility, being being informal in nature, and unlike a court proceedings. So these are the highlights of a pre-litigation mediation over a formal court proceeding.
Okay. And during the COVID times in pre-litigation mediation, I mean, has it given a forum for IP owners, who may have been a little averse to formal litigation after all the impact of COVID? Do you think it has helped the IP owners in some way?
So before COVID started, pre-litigation mediations, let's now take the example. There are lots of courts which has a mediation center and pre-litigation mediations are happening. But since our practice is more confined to the Delhi High Court, I would be specifically speaking with respect to the High Court mediation center. So before the, the pandemic started, before the lockdown started, I was told that during April 2019 to September 2019, there were around 220 pre-litigation mediation cases filed. And just after the pandemic started, and when the courts along with the mediation center started functioning, electronically through virtual hearings, the number of pre-litigation mediations filed before the Delhi High Court Mediation Center is 250 plus. And there is a success rate of 70%. So now coming to one of the biggest, very big advantage, which the pandemic actually brought in an advantage to mediation proceedings, which is the fact that during the before pandemic mediation proceedings, the parties had to come in person. The representatives of the decision making people, or the representatives of the companies involved in the dispute, had to come in person. So most of the times it so happened that a company which has filed a mediation proceeding is located in Bombay. So the decision making person is a person sitting in Bombay. So he could never travel to Delhi each time a mediation proceeding is listed. So it was his representative or his power of attorney holder who came on behalf of the company. But even though he might be a power of attorney holder, he could not take decisions then and there. What this pandemic has done, what the plus point which it has given to proceedings, it has become virtual, because of which the actual person who's making the decision, who is the director, who is a very busy person, who could not have attended the proceedings if it was a physical proceedings, physical appearance needed, can now easily attend the proceedings sitting at home. So decisions can be taken quickly. So that is a big advantage. So accessibility and availability of the real decision making. So end of the day, everybody should understand that mediation proceedings, the interference of lawyers is only to facilitate. So it is the parties who has to settle the dispute with the assistance, of course, of the mediator and their lawyers. But it is more of a process which is oriented towards a party oriented process, rather than a lawyer interference process, which is like a court proceedings. So now when the real decision making people can directly come sitting in their homes and their personal offices, so the success rate is much high. And if you see the number itself, the number has actually increased during the pandemic. Of course, the success rate is also so high. So it is actually very, people find it much more. So rather than getting a small solution, they get a huge solution for all their disputes for all times to come.
Speaking of success, like you mentioned, the success rate is very high. How effective has pre-litigation mediation been for IP enforcement in particular?
So pre-litigation mediation was now initially, now any normal matter also can be referred to mediation. That is one thing. In your Commercial Courts Act, you have a specific provision which says, if you do not ask the court while filing a suit, if you do not request the court to pass any urgent prayers, like an Order 39(1) and 2 application, or an application seeking an injunction, or an application seeking ante and pillar orders and local commissioners, or any other sort of urgent prayers, the matter has to go for pre-litigation mediation. All commercial matters. So last week I read in the newspaper that some lawyer who is the president of some youth bar association, I don't remember the case particulars clearly, has filed a petition before the Honorable Supreme Court, wherein he asked the court that this pre-litigation mediation is an important thing, not just limited to commercial matters. Make it compulsory for people to attend to opt for pre-litigation mediation before they come to court, because half of the court's burden can be reduced in that manner. So on the 22nd of October, which is like 3-4 days back or something, it was listed before the court, and I read a newspaper article saying that the Honorable Chief Justice's court has issued notice to the Law Ministry, asking the Law Ministry to give their opinion on how this can be done. So now, while we are talking about pre-litigation in relation to commercial matters, and that too specifically with reference to IP matters. You have pre-litigation happening in very checkered history matters which are very checkered history, where emotions are involved, such as matrimonial matters. So if some matters which are so fought tooth and nail, like matrimonial matter can be settled through litigation mediation,
Very
then
true.
there's nothing stopping a pure IP dispute or a dispute of a commercial nature to be easily resolved through what do you call it, litigation through litigation mediation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
So
now,
it will of course reduce the court's burden as well.
right. Now, speaking of IP enforcement, I mean, with the rise in concern of IP owners for their brands and products, they are getting more and more cautious about counterfeiters, and law seems to be keeping up with it as well.
Yeah,
Be it
that's
the
right.
civil, criminal, and customs enforcement, all government bodies are trying to get better knowledge about IP laws and brand protection through enforcement.
That's right. So,
and
for
Mr. Khan and Mr. Byala here,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, have themselves undertaken many workshops in various state
Yes.
police and with custom officials imparting knowledge and awareness about IP protection and enforcement. I mean, and to gain a better perspective about the civil IP litigation, which is more traditional and more commonly resorted route when it comes to IP enforcement, I would like to ask Mr. Agrawal here that how do you think an IP civil suit differs from an ordinary civil suit? Are there, I mean, any unique characteristics to it?
Hi, Karan. Thanks. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks. This is in fact actually a very, I think, an important and interesting topic, which maybe is not that so discussed, because IP by its very nature has certain very unique features which differentiates it from other kinds of disputes, other kinds of wrongs. And although we do follow common systems and common procedures for irrespective of the nature, but there are certain things which make it unique, because of which perhaps there is a need to have a relook at the procedure which we follow. So if I can tell a couple of most unique features which I think make an IP dispute very different from other rights, will be that it's a right in rem. So the nature of the right is very universal in nature. You get an exclusive right against the world at large. So once you have an IP right, essentially no one is supposed to violate that right, or no one is supposed to do anything which is similar to what you own. So the world at large can be, your opponent, can be violating your rights, can be a defendant in cases. So for a right holder for a specific and a particular right might be having litigations with hundreds of defendants, for example, in different proceedings, but the underlying right remains the same. Which is, if you see, uh, as opposed to something like a ordinary dispute, an ordinary tort dispute, or an ordinary tenant landlord dispute, where there be one property and identified parties, identified tenant, identified landlord, and they will be fighting. There cannot be any other dispute with any other person related to that property or that particular transaction. But opposed to that, an IP dispute, same right can be violated by 100 people at various places in the country, or even at the world. So defendants are therefore not identified, not certain, not ascertainable, unlike an ordinary dispute. Similarly, let's say a contractual dispute arising, there will be an underlying contract, there will be a fixed communication, fixed parties, and therefore the evidence is limited, and everything is certain and identified, which does not exist in IP. So that is, I think, one feature which makes it very unique. The other which I think makes it very unique is the intangible nature of the right, which, unlike other tangible rights, makes it possible to be violated from any part of the world, any part of the country. So let's say for a theft, a particular property can be stolen by a particular person only, and only once. So once someone has taken something, stolen something, that violation is caused, you know who has caused it, and it can't be again stolen unless, of course, it comes back to you or something. But because being an intangible right, the same right can be violated by one person, then by another person, and it can just keep on going. So the right holder, of course, therefore has a higher burden, higher responsibility to protect his right, other than, let's say, a tangible right. So and these are perhaps the reason why there are certain specific provisions which concerns IP also. For example, jurisdiction, uh, ordinarily, if you see for civil cases, is always at the place of cause of action or at the place where the defendant is based. But perhaps in recognition of this unique feature of IP, the legislature has made us a completely opposite jurisdiction provision where the plaintiff can institute a proceedings at its own place. So, and in my view, although there is no clarity on that, it is only because of this reason, because a plaintiff's right, an IP holder's right, can be violated by hundreds of people at any place, and it can't be expected for the plaintiff to run around at various places to file
Absolutely.
cases.
Absolutely.
So that is perhaps one statutory recognition of the unique nature of IP right, I would say.
Right.
And but at the same time, it also raises some certain challenges. For example, intangible, because being an intangible right and being a right in rem, issues like evidence of violation and the extent of injury, which is otherwise ascertainable in ordinary disputes. For example, in a contractual dispute, there will always be a liquidated damages. There can be a liquidated damages provision, or the payment terms are defined, so you know that this much payment has been defaulted and this much will be the loss which has been caused to you. But in IP dispute, it's very difficult to know the extent of actual infringement which would have been caused by a person, or even having an evidence of infringement can be a difficulty in many cases, and that is also maybe a reason why there are extraordinary and unique remedies which are resorted to in IP cases, like ex parte
Absolutely.
injunctions become very important.
Right.
Anti-pillar and John Doe orders become very important, where a court-appointed commissioner is can be crucial to go and do a search and seizure at defendant's premises, so that the evidence can be found and the plaintiff can actually show that there was an infringement of his or her rights, which otherwise in a normal dispute, let's say, it will be very uncertain. If there's a payment default, it's very clear that there's a payment default. There cannot be any dispute whether the wrong was caused or not.
But I would like to, also mention here that IP was something that was added to the Commercial Courts Act very recently in 2015. And how do you think it has made any difference in the civil enforcement proceedings before the court?
Commercial Courts Act in the last about 4 to 5 years has itself been an evolving process. But what the most, I think, from a practitioner's point of view, it's not it can be a good thing, also a bad thing. Also, it has definitely made things more stricter, and therefore it requires a substantially higher level of discipline and diligence from the litigants also, and from the lawyers, practitioners also. So, for example, documents which earlier used to be, or in a normal civil proceeding, even now, parties can keep filing documents at various stages of the proceedings, and as many as they find as they want to file. And courts have been liberal about it. They say that you can be allowed to file documents. Eventually, whatever you want to file, you can keep filing it till the trial starts, or even after the trial starts. But now, after the Commercial Courts Act, that has become very strict. Parties are supposed to file everything when they come to court, and if something additionally needs to be filed, they need to make out very strong grounds, and that too, like, document would have come into existence later, not like a document which you knew but you did not file it. So in that ways, things have become very strict, very requiring a lot of discipline, and there margin of error is very low. But a lot of advantages have also flown. For example, timelines have reduced a lot. Earlier, when a litigation would go on even for 6-7 years or even more, now for a contested case going to trial and everything, and now as quickly as 2 years it can be decided in a properly contested matter, with trial, with evidence and everything, the entire process. So that has come down a lot, and with that we can see on ground now, since it's been more than 4-5 years since Commercial Courts Act came. So initially for 1 or 2 years people were waiting, but now we can see cases filed in 2018, 17 have attained finality after proper contest. So that has made a lot of, and I think summary judgment is a feature which has come first time perhaps in India, which has also added to this. So now, earlier the norm used to be trial. Now trial is no longer a norm. You can have a final decree, a contested matter decree, without having any kind of oral evidence. Only on the basis of documentary evidence, a court can pass a final decree. So, and for IP disputes, that has been the most significant aspect, because IP disputes by their very nature are largely documented, and the right is established through a registration certificate or a document, or through user documents to show use, and infringement action is through, let's say, an evidence of seizure by a local commissioner, or a document or some documented evidence showing the infringement being done by the defendant. And therefore the only question remains is whether it is an infringement or not. That can be decided through documentary evidence. So
Also
those
about,
things.
yeah.
Hmm.
Also
Yeah.
about, I mean, I believe that there's a mandatory pre-institution litigation also. I mean, in the section 12A, I believe it says that, till an urgent intent relief under the Act, in cases where it's not very urgent, a pre-litigation mediation must be resorted to by the parties. And this is the new inclusion in the Commercial Courts Act. I would like to ask Mr. Sri Kumaran also about his opinion on this, that about the mandatory pre-litigation institution, what do you think? Is it the right approach?
It's good in the sense what the court tries to achieve is that if the parties can resolve the dispute, if there is no urgency, why to come to court? So if you can finish off your matter before coming to court, then that's the end of it. Lot many times it so happens then in IP matters that the trial is like after coming into force of the Commercial Courts Act, as Shobit very rightly mentioned, the things get over fast. The trial gets over fast, but again we hit another roadblock. That roadblock is known as the regular matter list. Matters are pending there in the regular matter list and has not been decided for many years, just because the regular functioning of the court itself doesn't get over. Then how can the matter be heard which is there in the regular matter list? So for the understanding of the audience, regular matter list is that list of matters which the Delhi High Court has, where the matters are ripe for final arguments, which means evidence is completed, cross-examination, everything is over. Now the final arguments has to be done. But there are so many matters which are there in the regular matters list, and that list is taken by the High Court unless and until there is an urgency. Matters are taken out of turn. If there is an urgency which you can point out to the court, then the court takes out the matter out of turn. Otherwise, it is taken one by one on its own turn. And the problem is that once the matter is there, it takes a lot of time to come. If you do not apprise the court of the urgency involved, it takes its own time to come. So now, if the matter can be finished off at very low cost proceeding, which is a pre-litigation mediation at the very outset itself, why do you have to burden the court when the court is already burdened? So that is one aspect.
In this, if I can just add one more thing also, because we're
Please.
talking about mediation and in the context of IP. So I think also this also makes an IP dispute unique, although of course mediation can be resorted to and everything. But again, what makes it unique is because of the extraordinary relief sometimes which you may need, because of which a pre-litigation mediation as opposed to a post-litigation mediation, a pre-litigation mediation cannot apply at all. For example, where you are having where you need a search and seizure order, whereas there's a pure counterfeiting. For example, pure counterfeiting cases can never have a pre-institution mediation, ordinarily at least. So that is also something which makes it very unique, and because of which I would say IP and litigation and IP and mediation is more of a dynamic procedure where a right holder needs to decide strategically whether they want to go for mediation, whether a particular situation requires mediation at all or can accommodate mediation at all, or whether they should go for a normal litigation procedure.
Absolutely. But I'm also sure that during these COVID times, and since everything is affected, COVID has made an impact everywhere. There are certain challenges, I'm sure, that have come up in the civil enforcement process also, like difficulty in taking in a local commission order, or the granting of orders in the first place, or the challenges related to the listing or hearing of cases. What challenges has COVID brought to this functioning?
For few months, I would say, let's say in the initial April till August period, about 4-5 months, not just for IP, the overall litigation procedure was so affected because courts, by their very nature, have always been a physical hearing forum, unlike a lot of other things like arbitrations and all, which have routinely also happened through video conferencing, even the normal times. So because of the effect of the entire court system and the enforcement system, consequently, it was a very obvious outcome that it did get affected for a bit. But then as we evolved, I think everyone would agree that now perhaps the court system has in fact become smoother, as we can say, as Achu was also pointing out, people can attend from anywhere. So an IP, as I was saying, being by its nature, you can have defendants from all of the country, or the plaintiff can be based anywhere. So, and a grievance would earlier that the defendants would also raise would be that they have to be dragged to a Delhi court or some other court. Now that grievance also to an extent goes because they can attend virtually. They don't need not come to court at all. They can engage their local lawyer based there also. So those systems now can be seen as an advantage now. But the biggest, I think, the challenge which was faced was, of course, the local commissioner and procedure, and the courts did the judges very openly did say that we cannot appoint a local commissioner, we cannot give a local commissioner relief, even if you were asking because of the safety issues, the health issues. So they were relief sought, but they were not granted. So that of course got affected. But now I think in the last 1 month or so, with travel having increased and things becoming better, so local commissioner orders are being granted, but of course it is still much reduced at a very in only very specific cases, and it is difficult to make out a case, convince the court and the registry to list a matter requiring a local commissioner proceeding. So that of course is the biggest challenge which has been there and to an extent is still there. But apart from that, virtual hearing, which was earlier seen as a challenge, I think is not so much seen as a challenge or a limitation anymore. It is seen more like an advantage now. It saves a lot of time also for people in traveling, those things. So that is, I think, but I think humans by the nature evolve. So probably we are now just adjusting to everything, and things otherwise are moving smoothly. And courts are probably going to start taking up some regular cases, normal cases, which they were not taking earlier in the coming few days. So that has been probably the biggest change with COVID.
Mr. Beala, would you like to add something to this? Overcoming, as Shobit just said, we have adapted to the new format, and we have always evolved with challenges that have come across our way. But would you like to add something to what Shobit just mentioned?
See, we have faced the situation in the early days, as Shobit said, but now slowly and gradually we are doing good, and the virtual hearings are very effective. And especially with respect to the pre-litigation mediation in IP, as Achyutan has rightly said, that there is an advantage that the decision maker can also participate because it is basically the client-oriented forum. And we have seen there are few cases. I would rather give you an example of the software industries. So most of the software clients, they have their copyrights, intellectual property rights. So they have seen that some people are infringing their copyrights. They are using their unlicensed software, and their purpose of filing the civil lawsuit is just for the compliance purposes. So we have a very robust practice where instead of filing civil lawsuit, we are initiating pre-litigation mediation. We are calling the defendant, and defendant is also a respectable entity. They also have their goodwill and reputation in the market, and the software industry clients are also having good reputation. So instead of getting into the litigation for the court, so pre-litigation mediation is the best forum for them, and they are filing cases and they are calling upon the defendant's entity, and they are trying to resolve this issue that okay, these are the software, this is the issue we have, and why don't you buy the software? And for an ethical business you have to be fully compliant. So that is, I think, one of the factor which is very, very important. And similarly in other clients also, the pre-litigation mediation and the IP under the Civil Commercial Court Act is doing really good, and it is good for for the defendants as well as for the clients, because they are getting compliance at a very low cost and in a very effective manner, and that is binding on them for the futures to come. So that way it is good.
Right, absolutely, very right, sir. Speaking of now challenges in enforcement, I myself have faced a great deal while conducting a criminal raid during the COVID times in Ludhiana, Punjab, for a sanitizer brand. Like earlier in a criminal raid, we used to approach the senior police officials of the state or the district and file a complaint, then follow up with the concerned police station. But COVID sure has made changes everywhere. The procedure has changed. Things have to be worked out differently. We have to find new routes everywhere. But there are other factors also to be taken into account before going ahead with filing a criminal complaint for enforcement. And I would like to ask Mr. Saif here to elaborate on this point, that if an IP owner is going for a criminal action, then what factors do matter? What factors are to be taken into consideration before going for them?
Yeah, hi, Karan. Thank you so much. Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Ravandle for giving us this opportunity to, come before the students and talk about this knowledge session. And also all the people who have joined this particular webinars. Thank you so much. So coming back to your point, Karan, as we have discussed, challenges have been everywhere, and it is basically, as there is a saying that crisis creates demand, so the counterfeits in this particular time has gone up significantly. Initially, the effect of COVID has been so much that it's interrupted, supply chain, it's interrupted even the consumer behavior in a way that, because of anxiety and the increased anxiety and fear that created the consumer became more vulnerable and could be easily exploited. So the counterfeiters made a big inroad in terms of flourishing their part of the business, because because of the decreased mobility of people, they were always anonymous, and most of the buying and selling shifted to online marketplace. So it's counterfeit. What we usually saw was restricted to brick and mortar store has actually moved on to online platforms, and there have been, which has been very easy for people to be exploited. For counterfeiters is been the biggest advantage. Selling anything over the internet is anonymity, so you're not right on the face of it. You're not in front of the people who are in front of the law enforcement agency or before the consumer or before any investigation team that does intelligence gathering from the ground. So that has been there, and because of that, the new concepts have evolved. For example, like my colleagues just spoke about the pre-lit mediation and the Commercial Courts Act, everything started online, and things did start to work, because we had to go on with the life, considering whatever situation that is there. And most of the times when crises like these come up, you tend to innovate, and work out things. Yes, on the criminal side, once somebody is to choose about the kind of action that has to be initiated, it depends a lot on the kind of jurisdiction that you are in. That has to be taken into consideration. It depends a lot on the kind of impact that the brand wants to create. So a brand owner may have various objectives. One is to create just a market impact. The other is to collect damages. And of course, the underlying objective of every brand owner is to stop counterfeits. But then one has to get into the various options that are available. So one can choose civil or criminal. There is no hard and fast rule that one should choose one particular way of enforcing IP rights. It could be depending. For example, you just mentioned about Punjab, when the sanitizer raid had to happen. Now, if you would know that we had to move on from the police because they were so busy in taking care of the lockdown, we had to move on to the drug inspector to carry out the raid. So, and it was an Ayurvedic product, so we had to get on to the Ayurvedic drug inspector. So now these things have to be innovated on ground when you see the situation. And that's where the legal assistance, the lawyers' acumen at that particular time comes into, because you have to deliver the best, that is to the brand owner, that is you stop the counterfeiter and also stop the harm that is being caused to the consumer. After all, the brand reputation and delusion is all ultimately related to the consumer in the outside world. So there have been, it's not that the police did not take actions. Police, like for example, if we compare two different jurisdictions of Andhra Pradesh and Punjab, Punjab was too busy in enforcing lockdown, but at the same time in Hyderabad, the police was very active taking action against some of those products which are part of the essential commodity. And that's where, you would notice that particular trend that the counterfeiters always move according to the consumer behavior and the consumer acumen in regard to the circumstances and the situation. So more of essential goods, for example, sanitizers, PPE kits, the mask, these were the ones that are being sold, and people would go and buy out of anxiety whatever that was coming to them. And that is when the counterfeiters saw that there is they are behind the veil of selling it either through online, or they even use social platforms like Facebook as well as WhatsApp. You would, in these particular times, I have noticed, which I've come across through various brand owners and my friends too, that there would be hashtags on Facebook which would say a cheap bargain, easily available, 24, few hours delivery kind of products, and people would just go and buy it. Now, the process has not really changed, as the laws are the same that have been to enforce. For example, in criminal, if copyright or trademark action has to be taken, there are criminal remedies given in both the acts. Now, the way it had to be implemented, so one is that there was a lot of reluctancy of the police, also the law enforcement agency, to actually get into somebody's premises. One was the fear of spread of COVID. The other was that there was a lot of market association and the political pressure as to not go and disturb the normal market, because ultimately, since the supply chain was disrupted, but there was a demand there in some way or the other, but there was so much of disruption that the anxiety levels were very, very high. So law enforcement had to deal with a whole lot of issues while coming to enforce things. But yes, there have been involvements. Initially, one had to really go file a complaint, sit with the commissioner of police or the concerned officer. But yes, now we could file a complaint online, and follow it up through, and probably fix a time and date to meet that particular law enforcement officer, after you have interacted with him. And I noticed this with my personal experience that people who are not so techno savvy at that moment, or they were lazy to use technology, have this particular situation has made them, come to terms with it and start using it. For example, while we do matters before the magistrate's court, in the earlier times, one police officer had to run from one particular court to the other, to appear, or because he may be required for many matters in different places. But now he could probably sit from a station, and attend multiple hearings. So it has also helped in curbing that time gap. Yes, but it does have its own drawbacks, where sometimes you really need to make that particular follow-up with the law enforcement. The most important thing is that in India, there are laws for everything. We do not need more laws. All we need is a proper implementation. And the implementation comes is when you are consistent in your objective of what you're going to do. For example, if you are for brand protection, and this is all the young lawyers who are studying law here, is for them to, when you get into practice, you have to be very, very patient while you're dealing either in litigation, that may be on the civil side, or it may be on the criminal side. You need to be patient because you have to also understand, as the person that you're dealing with, may it be a judge, may it be a police officer, that that particular person has got a lot of things to do, and IP is such a thing that that attitude is still developing. As you mentioned some time back, that I and Manish have been very, very much involved with a lot of academies, police academies, and Manish has been doing on custom side too, that we have been educating them on IP laws and how things work, because knowledge was one of the drawback, and they were reluctant that if they are taking up something for a specialized law, will they be able to implement it in a right format or not? So that's something which is evolving. It's an evolving process, but then the participation has to be collective. We cannot expect that either the courts or the law enforcement agency to do something for us. We should also look at it as to what we can do for them to, maybe impart knowledge in a way, or maybe provide them that kind of support from the brand owner's perspective. For example, you don't expect a police officer to be an expert in identifying between a fake or an original product. So that's where the brand owners come in. They need to give support so that you have your technical expert on ground, or maybe somebody authorized by you, maybe your lawyer, or
Absolutely. Absolutely.
help out. So yeah,
Do you,
there is a lot of changes and a lot of improvements, but yes, consistency is something that is the key to achieve anything that you're going to be doing in terms of enforcing your legal right.
Absolutely, absolutely. But over the years of your practice, do you also think that there has been a change in the inclination, or there's a change in the trend of from the police officials' side of taking an FIR or filing an FIR under the Copyright Act or the Trademark Act? Do you think there's a difference, or there's a better inclination towards either of the two?
So it's Karan, it's like this. Uh, Again, it goes back to the know-how that you need to educate the police officer if the person is not introduced to that particular law. And mostly when you are going a particular enforcement action with regard to that could be enforcement of counterfeit. So now that will involve both trademark and copyright. So in most of the brand infringement cases, especially where a trademark involves some kind of an artistic work in it, copyright is automatically invoked. So inclination of police officers, you usually would choose a copyright section first, and probably also include something from the IPC, like a 420 IPC. And trademarks, yes, they do, but as there is one particular section 1154 of the Trademarks Act where it's very, very important that where it is mandatory, in fact, that the police officer should take opinion from the registrar before carrying out search and seizure. So, but if you register an FIR in copyright or under a section of IPC, then it's easy for a police officer to move ahead with the action. Now, what I have seen with the evolving trend in my practice, that initially it all started that police would simply say that, I do not want to go with the trademark action because we will have to go with the opinion. So then the trend came that where the brand owners would go file a complaint before a magistrate, and the complainant would be the brand owner, and you had the investigation officer file an application before the magistrate to issue warrants, which is under 93 and 94 of the CRPC for search and seizure. That could actually help bypass that 1154 provision of taking registrar's opinion before carrying out search and seizure. So whenever there is a particular specialized law that is there for any law enforcement agency, and the systems that we have in India and the kind of law that we have, procedural as well as otherwise, that you are able to innovate as you go forward. So initially, it was only investigation agencies, some law firms doing only actions through police, and some would choose civil actions. Now that has little bit changed in a way from jurisdiction point of view. For example, if a brand owner is based in Delhi, Delhi High Court is very, very active. Even our district courts are very, very active in implementation of IP laws. So people would rather choose a civil action to a criminal action, because it's faster. You can file a lawsuit today and it can be listed after a day or two. And then you get an order on day one, you have a local commissioner and the local commissioner can be accompanied with the police. Then again, but it all depends what the brand owner is needing. Similarly, in the police action, for example, if you're in an interior of any particular state where the civil courts are not so IP savvy, you have no option but to go with the police action. And while you're doing a police action, you have to really look into what are the, not just restrict yourself to the trademark and copyright, but also look at the product that is involved. So for example, you spoke about hand sanitizer. You could also, in that, you could always invoke Drugs and Cosmetics Act. If it's counterfeit medicine, something like that could happen. Now, if it was other things like oil or lubricants, Essential Commodities Act come in. And now recent notifications have included certain things in essential goods. So in these days, even the Disaster Management Act was put into action. So there is always that scope, there is always that space to, innovate further and provide that assistance to the law enforcement also, in terms of, because when they are dealing with so much, as a police station you visited yourself, you know the kind of cases. The first priority is a murder, the second one is, you know, probably cheating and fraud cases, then comes the matrimonial, and the last comes the IP. That's what they look at. But then where did IP was easily enforceable in the COVID time, where essential goods were being counterfeited: hand sanitizers, face mask, PPE kits, and, you know, other pharmaceutical products, or maybe the food products that were there. So yeah, that's been the trend, and it's all positive. I don't see anything
It is.
negative.
It is.
You know, it's working well. It'll work well.
And it's all, from my experience, it's all been very exciting also to conduct criminal raids and civil as well. But with criminals, since you have to evolve on the ground and you have to think out of the box to convince the police officials to conduct the raid in time, it is all too much fun. But I'm sure with these come challenges as well. You know, you're dealing with different state officials, different police officials, and every police official, according to my experience as well, has a very different approach. And sometimes they won't be very accepting about what you've come to them with the complaint. Sometimes they will be very accepting. They'll want you to do the raid. They want more of it. What challenges do you think are there in a criminal raid in particular, that if our young students here want to pursue in future, they should be careful or they should be able to deal with?
Yeah, so that's a good question, actually. You know, that's very, very important that one should know from, is very, very important to basically the approach of every action that you take. So every police officer or a law enforcement officer, any agency, has got his own mind. They may be of, some may be of socialist thought process, and think that an action like this is just going to curb business of somebody and it's not helpful. But then, yes, my experience has been, and in the initial years, I and Manish used to deal with a whole lot of people where we've gone for actions, maybe software or anything else, and we have been outrightly refused. You know, they said that we do not agree with this particular act. But then, yes, we always had his senior official to approach to. So the good part is that in bureaucracy, you will always have somebody over someone, and you keep going from one step to the other. You have to convince at least some authority, who gives you that particular go ahead to tell his subordinate officers to go and take action. And I have also noticed one particular trend, that with the new officers, after this trainings and other things have taken place by various government agencies and various other forums to train law enforcement agencies, there is a shift in mind frame with regard to looking at IP cases as a very, very serious nature kind of fraud. That's happened across the spectrum. So a police officer might not take, if you go to him and say that I need to go and do a raid against counterfeit apparel brands. For example, someone is selling a product which is of Louis Vuitton or maybe Tommy Hilfiger or CK, and the police might not be so serious about it. But when then it comes to medicines or essential goods or consumable products, then they may take it very, very seriously. And my advice to the students is, when they get into this kind of practices, first and foremost is that you should know your act well. You should know your bare act very, very well. The second important thing is that you should know the facts of your case properly. You should be aware about the evidence that you have. Your complaint should mention about the right that your brand owner owns. Your complaint should also give an evidence of infringement that is happening. Second important thing is that you should be able to, you should have that confidence, you should gather that confidence to go and meet the top police official, may it be a commissioner of police or anybody. You should not be reluctant, because after all, they're all human beings. Nobody is going to be shunted out if someone is going to go and make sense in front of anybody, and you should know exactly how to start your discussion. And the best way to do that is create an urgency of your matter before that particular concerned officer. Once you create an urgency and you're consistent and follow up, you will have a smooth sail. But yes, as I said, you have to be patient. They will do work for you, but you have to be patient. And that's what it is. Karan, I cannot hear you. I think you're on mute.
I believe. Is it audible now?
Yeah.
I believe, yeah, challenges, as you said, are everywhere, and these are also certain challenges of the criminal side. There are challenges on the custom side as well, since it's a fairly new practice, custom enforcement. I mean, it's still considered to be new, though it's been there for about more than 10 years now. But there is still better understanding coming in in the customs officials and the lawyers as well. I would like to include Mr. Beala here, that why would somebody opt for a customs enforcement over any other, be it civil or criminal now?
Currency, though the custom rules, the IPR rules under the Indian Customs Acts were framed in 2007, but still it is considered very new. And why they were introduced, I'll just give you one short background of this. The World Trade Organization, and what they said to their members, that you should have some agreement, and under that agreement you have to create a system where the right holder can lodge a complaint if they get to know that somebody is importing their infringing products. So that is called a TRIPS agreement. That is a trade related aspects of intellectual property rights. That is the agreement which was signed by the members of the WTO. So, and India being a member of WTO, they also signed this TRIPS agreement. And under the Article 51 of the TRIPS agreement, there is an obligation of all the members to create a system to, for the right holders to file a complaint for the importation of the infringing products. So considering those obligations under the TRIPS agreement, which is considered as an international document, international agreement, India under the Customs Act, Section 11 and Section 156 of the Indian Customs Act, the Commissioner of the Custom has the power to frame the rules. They introduced these border enforcement rules in 2007. And under these border enforcement rules, the system was created where the right holder can register their intellectual property rights with Indian Customs. And then after that, Indian Customs will take action, suo moto actions against those importers who are infringing their intellectual property rights. So that is the genesis behind this border enforcement rules under the custom enforcement. And we have the laws, as Saif rightly said, that we have the laws, we have so many things already in place. All we need is the implementation. All we need is that, yes, we have to educate, we have to create awareness. And this is what we are doing. Saif is also doing a lot of police training, and I'm also doing a lot of customs training. We are going and educating to these enforcement agencies throughout India, and we are talking about IP laws. We are talking about, in terms of criminal actions, we are saying that investigation in IP crimes, what are the main things you have to consider it and how to go about it. Similarly, under the customs, we are talking about roles and powers of the custom officials. The sad part is that most of the custom officers, though it's been more than 13 years, they are not aware of these IP rules. And we have to go and tell them that, yeah, these are your powers, these are your roles. This is what you can do under the Customs Act. So this is what we are doing. Now, why, coming back to your question, why the IP owner can opt for a custom enforcement rather than a civil and criminal? See, according to me, civil and criminal is, they can create a good impact. Suppose if you have a target which is a local manufacturer, which is producing counterfeit products locally, then the custom would not be applicable. Then you have only criminal and civil option. But when you have the intelligence, that somebody is importing product from, for example, from China or from any other country through custom route, then it is better to go with the custom action. Why? Okay. Because custom action can stop the at the border entry level, and they will not come into the commercial market. Suppose if they come into the commercial market and they are spread like north, east, west, south to different 20 shops, then you have to target each and every shops in a different jurisdiction, which will be a very time consuming and very costly. However, if you have a proper custom enforcement mechanism in place, IP owner has registered its rights and everything, you can stop that products which are coming through customs. So that is the first and foremost advantage, that the IP owner can consider it depending upon the intelligence, that what kind of products, whether they are locally manufactured or whether they are imported, goods.
This is a great benefit for the IP owners, I'm sure. they benefit a lot, I'm sure, from this. But are there other benefits that since custom involves the government officials directly, are there any other benefits that the government also has out of custom enforcement over the others?
See, unlike civil proceedings and the criminal proceedings, where the IP owner has the remedy to claim damages, to claim compensation, or for the criminal matter also, if they are settling through plea bargaining or any other mode, then you can demand some kind of a compensation or the litigation cost. But in custom proceedings, the right holder is not getting anything. The right holder is only getting a good order where the products have been stopped at the entry level. However, the government can get the benefit, because if the custom is imposing some kind of a penalty, that penalty will go to the government as a revenue. So custom enforcement is a good revenue model, because we have seen cases where the Indian custom has imposed a penalty of rupees 50 lakh rupees, 25 lakh rupees on the habitual importers. We have highlighted those cases where the importer is again and again importing counterfeit goods, and he's involved in so many cases. So the custom has appreciated our submissions, and custom has passed orders considering the habitual nature of this kind of importers, and they have imposed heavy penalties, and those penalties have gone to the government. So it is a good revenue, and custom is a revenue agency of the Indian government. So it's a good revenue for them. It is unlike the civil and criminal proceeding where the IP owner is claiming something. Here you cannot claim anything.
And
Just
how much
getting
do you think has the revenue been affected due to COVID? I mean, how has COVID impacted all the sides in custom enforcement?
Yeah, I think you are asking this question to everyone, because I'll tell you one thing.
This is
COVID has impacted everyone. The life has
absolutely.
become standstill in few early days. In I think till May, I think the situation was very bad, because all the government offices were shut, and slowly and gradually they started with some limited staff in May, and then unfortunately in June we have that Indo-China issue also, because most of the imports which is coming to India is coming from China. So all the goods which are coming from China were also suspended, and there was no clarity whether the Indian custom will act on these cases or not, because there was a news that the India will boycott China in each and every aspect. They will not do any kind of a business or something like that. So there was a situation, I think till June, July, the situation was very tough, though we were getting some notification from different custom offices. But yes, after I think June, July, when everything has moved and slowly and gradually we are, now getting used to it. So again, we have seen a shift that, we are getting the notification from the customs that yes, the goods have been suspended. And as you said, that yes, it is very, very beneficial for the IP owners, because in this, first of all, it's a quick action. In unlike civil and criminal, where you have to take the police and you have to take the civil court order, and then you go for a raid, and then you look for the seizure, because that is the most important thing. Until and unless you do not seize the infringing products, you do not have a case against the person. Whereas in customs, it is a seizure before action. It is the custom is seizing the
Okay.
goods, and then they are intimating you. So you are joining the proceeding after the seizure has taken place. And seizure is also not in small numbers. It is huge, because generally the containers are suspended, big consignments are suspended, and the volume is very high. So from IP owners perspective, the custom is very, very cost effective and very quick, and there is no trial needed, nothing. Because as you know, in the Trademark Act and the Copyright Act, the onus is on the person to prove that yes, he has used the trademark with the permission of the IP owner. That is a specific section under the Trademark Act. So we use that particular section with the customs. We simply ask the custom officer, that ask the importer to show the permission or consent or some kind of a document that yes, he has sought the permission from the brand owner to use the trademark. So I think on that ground only, when they are unable to show any document, nothing like it, so customs straight away pass an order for absolute confiscation and pass a penalty against the importer. So that way it is very, very good.
So it is all documented, it is all proper procedural process.
Yeah,
and in criminal also, I mean, there are procedures to be followed, but the procedures have changed due to the COVID times. So I'd like to ask Mr. Khan, how much of the procedures changed due to the COVID times? Are there any different approaches that we need to take from now on? And do you think that they will carry on, or we will have to resort to the old school method that COVID times?
Yeah, so procedure basically remains the same, as they are codified, but the practice has changed. I mean, the way you approach things has changed, and we have to evolve to new things. You're rightly pointing that out, that with this particular scenario that is there and is going to be there, in fact, what we have evolved now, probably we will be, everybody has imbibed that into their daily life, and this is how we are going to be working further. And it has given a lot of people to work collectively. Like my colleagues were mentioning, Achu and Shobit, about earlier we did not have your benefit of the brand owner join the proceedings. He would have to travel. But now one can join the proceedings from any part of the world. He's before the judge. He can exactly see what is happening in the court, how his lawyer is presenting his case. They will be able to give inputs. Their chat box is there. So it's a very easy communication. And in fact, filing has also become, as a matter of practice, easier. We could serving copies by email, serving notices by email. That has become the new normal, rather than just sending out a hard copy. So yeah, that's been there. And practices have changed, not just for the IP practitioners, but also for the people who are selling goods in the market, the counterfeiters, and people have gone on to, in fact, while this trend was going on of lockdown, people became more IT savvy, and so did the counterfeiters and infringers. And you would have noticed that in the past, a trend started of tech frauds. They were, which was still getting people to, the law enforcement to come to terms with it. What was happening was, just to give a background about what tech fraud is, and this is a new IP infringement. It's a mix of all. It's IT, it's IP, and as well as the penal offenses. It's where the call centers would set up in a small corner, in a small office, or in a small room in India and various places. And these guys would make calls to various customers by, having creating domain names or subdomain names, and they will get in touch with the customers that are based abroad. They are in maybe US, Australia, Canada, and they would target a particular segment of people of a particular age between 55 to 65 who are more vulnerable. So they would send out pop-up messages to the systems, because they knew that everybody right now is working on the system. So moment a pop-up message comes that your computer is infected with virus, the person would click on it, and when they will click on it, he will be routed to that particular website either, or there will be a toll-free number given. So people would call that toll-free number and say what is the problem, and they will, these counterfeiters or these fraudsters will impersonate as if they are coming from a big brand like maybe an Apple, Microsoft, or Dell, anything like that. And they would send out a pop-up message that your computer is infected. The victim would basically call up, the customer would call up the person, and they would enforce a lot of malware into the system and take all the personal data out. Now, when we did these raids initially, and when we were doing with law enforcement, it was very difficult for them to capture evidence. You have been there with me on that. Very difficult to capture evidence, to collate evidence together, because it was all IT related. But with the recent trend, after we did those first kind of actions, and that requires a much more deeper discussion as to how it works, and we do not have that much of time to discuss that in totality, in detail. But yes, what I've seen with the recent trend, that first Delhi, Noida, and some Calcutta, some police actions, Gurgaon and Dehradun, Uttarakhand, there were actions there. But recently CBI actually took up this particular case, cases like these, and CPI went on, raided various places across India. So what can be seen is that technology, which was not so, people were not so technological savvy, but now even the law enforcement is primarily working on the cybercrime side of it, because everything is shifted there, and they have made themselves come to terms with it. And that's happened with the collaboration, as I said, with the owner, with the person who's there. You have been there, you've seen how you have to collaborate to provide that assistance as to what is in the law and to give them that safeguard that this is absolutely right with the procedural law that is in place. So yes, there have been changes, and those changes I believe are for good. These practices are for good, and they're going to go a long way.
So the saying, what I can understand, the saying that be street smart will change to be technology smart very soon.
Yeah,
People will have to be technology smart now to go by the new rules.
Look at the example here. We are all sitting at our homes or offices, and we have about more than about approximately about 150 people
Right.
join us. Otherwise, for this kind of a webinar, we would have to be probably in an auditorium.
Absolutely.
A lot of people come by beating the traffic and come at one particular place, meet. But it's now so easy and so comfortable that we are able to connect. Now, this is what is also evolving with courts, with law enforcement everywhere. So, yeah, that's working out.
Question to Mr. Agarwal now, that would you like this trend to follow on? Like people, young students are going to pass out, finish their law this year. What would you want them to see? I mean, this new trend of virtual hearings, be in front of a laptop or computer, or actually go to the physical hearings, attend there, because it's a different experience. We've come from that experience, but we've also seen this experience. What do you think should the approach in future be?
I mean, for starting first time, this is not obviously not something which you would want people to be, to have the first impression of, because eventually court practice is what you see in court and what you learn in court, in the actual court premises. So that ways, of course, it's going to be slightly different for the fresh graduates who might be coming out or something, or someone who might be looking for the first time. But I think it'll just be like a flip. Tables have flipped. They will be introduced to this thing first, and eventually when physical courts start, it will be more like an eye opener for them then. So that way, of course, nothing can beat physical court when it comes to starting for the first time, because there are a lot of things which you get to do. For us also, because we have had that physical experience for so long and we know the things, so for us it has been easy to adapt to this for that reason. I think for someone starting virtually for the first time probably will find it more difficult, in fact, although with people being more tech savvy now, they would think that they will be able to adapt to that more. But I still think those who have had an experience with the physical system are probably more equipped to adapt to this system more than straight away going with virtual.
But people are still learning. I mean, even all walks of lawyers from all generations, all ages have adapted to this. This is something that I'm sure nobody was prepared for, but they have now. And asking Mr. Sri Kumar here, do you think pre-litigation is also possible like this? Is it okay to be on virtual hearings for pre-litigation as well?
I guess as Shobit said, the basic norm for actual courts has always been physical appearance. So I would say pre-litigation should continue on with even after the lockdown and things are lifted. Pre-litigation, it should continue on with it should be optional, in the sense pre-litigation should have physical appearance if parties want to come, or if parties do not want to come, online appearance should always be an option. But when it comes to court, physical appearance is the norm, and this is the deviation from the norm.
I believe that option is right. I mean, that option saves time, that option saves the energy of traveling to different courts and everything. But I would like to conclude. This has been a wonderful session with you all. I personally have learned so much from what you all have shared with us. And I would like to shift on to a certain question and answer round. If our students here and other audience have questions to ask.
So ones who have questions, you may raise your hand. Yes. Ms. Ridhima Dixit.
I would just like to mention, please keep your questions to the point and to the discussion that has happened from the speaker's side.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
You are.
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon to everyone present. My question is specifically to Saif sir. And so since the pandemic, we can see that online selling of goods has increased even more and have overtaken the traditional selling sites and online marketplaces like Amazon or Flipkart, for example. So due to this, the sales are very difficult to detect. So I just wanted to know as to how do you think the content on such sites can be protected from being infringed or from being misused by other people?
Great. Thank you, Ridhima. That's a good question. In fact, that's what has been the worry for, that's when it started. It's been a worry for a lot of online platforms. Uh, it's because on the online platform, anonymity is something which is there, and because of that, to get to the real infringer sometimes get very, very difficult. But yes, the recommendation that has been to a lot of brand owners who run e-commerce platforms is that they need to monitor their websites more often than what used to be earlier, because a lot of sellers can come in now. Number two, they have to have a robust brand infringement program, specifically online, and many online platforms have come with it. For example, Amazon has got its own brand registry site. So similarly, Flipkart also has that you can report for counterfeits, and that is evolving. Now they all are coming through it. So that's on the brand owner's side, that there has to be a regular check on that, because one is for them to protect the delusion of their own brand. Second is to also protect the consumer. Now, coming to the consumer is also very important, that while you're going and buying a product online, you must verify exactly that authentication of the product. Now, some of those things are, of course, the person who buys online is primarily you get attracted because of the sale price discounted. So you must verify and check, because most brands do have their own websites too. So there should be a verification done by the consumer also, because not everything can be controlled by the brand owner or by the e-commerce platform owner. So yes, it's a collective approach to deal with this. I hope I'm able to answer your question, Ridhima.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
We have more
Yes.
people from the audience asking questions. I'm sure everyone's attracted to the topics we shared today.
Ms. Vidya Kakra, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Good afternoon, dear panelists. My question is directed to Mr. Sri Kumar. Sir, Section 12A of the Commercial Courts Act imposes a mandatory obligation upon the plaintiff to initiate mediation. However, the rules give the opposing party the right to refuse to participate in the mediation proceeding. So doesn't this optional approach vitiate the objective of the mediation? Sir, I think you are on mute.
So, Srikumar, you're on mute, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that these are two different things. One is mediation standalone, where there is no court proceedings attached, and one is you file a court proceeding. For example, under the Commercial Courts Act, you file a civil lawsuit involving a subject matter which is a commercial matter, in which suit you do not ask for a relief which is urgent in nature. Then, as per the Commercial Courts Act, the matter has to first go to the mediation center. Mediation center evaluates and sees whether the matter can be settled or not. If there is no settlement, the matter comes back to court. That is one set of matters. Then there is one set of matter which are not commercial suit matters, in which there are no commercial suits that have been filed, but these are simple pre-litigation matters where a simple application is filed not before the court, but filed before the Delhi High Court Mediation Center, where mediation is asked for. So these are two different things.
Right, sir. Thank you so
So
much.
being optional is in the second case where there is no court involvement. And when there is a court appointed mediation happening, then it is not optional. Then you have to go.
Okay. Right, sir. Thank you so much.
I hope I'm clear.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Kannan, unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, panelists. It was such an enlightening session. Thank you very much once again. Sir, my question is to Shri Kumar, sir. Just a follow-up question what Vidya just asked. That, sir, you talked about pre-lit mediation, right? The advantages of pre-lit mediation. But, sir, at the same time, now we have IPAB also. Right.
Yes.
Okay. So now, sir, we have the separate IPAB. So will it not defeat the purpose of IPAB? And second, sir, how to go ahead with the criminal proceedings? Say when there is a question of counterfeit goods, spurious goods. So will it pre-lit mediation will be beneficial there?
Ma'am, as one of my co-panelists, the first thing to deal with your question, let me break it into parts. First, regarding IPAB. IPAB, Intellectual Property Appellate Board, is only concerned with matters where the proceedings are sub judice before the trademark registry. For example, an opposition proceedings.
Yes.
Opposition proceeding against any application.
Yeah, that's what my confusion is, that can we, like, when there is an opposition, right, or cancellation of course after comes, but opposition or revocation, so pre-lit mediation will be beneficial at this stage.
Ma'am, it depends on what your matter is. For example, pre-litigation mediation is beneficial in cases where the parties can discuss and settle the matter. For example, as you rightly asked me, in cases where there is counterfeiting involved, there pre-litigation mediation is not a good option. You know why? Because you go to pre-litigation mediation, by the time you are sitting and talking, the counterfeit products are being destroyed, or he changes his venue, he shifts his venue, he even he even fudges evidence is being destroyed. So in cases where direct counterfeiting matters are involved, pre-litigation mediation is not a good option. You first go to court and get the counterfeit products seized by appointment of a local commissioner. But in matters where there is the whole dispute is where two people are actually fighting against a similar marks, and there is an ambiguity on who has a better right over a mark.
Right.
Those kind of cases where discussions can lead to a dispute resolution, and each party on a scale of 10, each party has their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's not a direct case of infringement.
Right.
Then pre-litigation mediation is always a good option.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Miss Anvija, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Miss Anvi? We are not able to hear you. Okay. Miss Anvi, you may organize yourself, and in the meanwhile, if anybody has further question, we'll take that. Miss Anvi, you may try again.
Miss Anvi Jha, you may unmute yourself.
Sir, can you hear me now?
Yes.
First, I would just like to thank all the panelists for such an insightful session. And so my question is directed to Mr. Shobhit, as he already touched upon this topic. And I was just curious to know that, do you think the changes which have come up in the court system now during the pandemic are better, and after, and if the pandemic does end, some of these changes should become a permanent feature in our court system currently?
Thanks, Anvi. See, I think the predominant change which has come is essentially having hearings virtually. Virtually, and the case files and everything being in soft copy rather than hard copies. So I think apart from that, otherwise more or less the procedure and everything remains same. So I think it will mostly be as what people prefer. Like some people do prefer, and some lawyers have been dealing with files digitally since many years, even before court system went virtual. And while some prefer hard copy, the traditional style of functioning. So I think probably what they can do is they can make it like a mix. They can have something where virtual and digital can continue simultaneously with the normal physical system. That is probably because I don't think they can make it like a mandatory thing going forward. Eventually, they will have to go back to physical system also. But some aspects like digital files and some optional virtual hearings probably can continue, so that at least where parties are based at a distance or there's some difficulty in traveling, so now since now we have the systems in place, they can continue using that system. That's what I feel.
Thank you, sir.
So the last call to the August gathering. If anybody has any question, please raise your hand and we'll respond to the question before we go to the next session. So no further questions. We take it as no further questions. Thank you. Yes. Mr. Karan, would you like to say a few words before I come in?
Definitely.
Yeah.
This has been very insightful for me as well, getting to learn new sides and new aspects. And of course, different experiences during these times matter, because for the people, for the students who are finishing their law this year, I'm sure this will help them get accustomed to the new ways of functioning. I thank the speakers for their time today. Thank you so much for being here. I thank Dr. Ravandle here for having us here for this session, and for Symbiosis Law School Noida for having arranged this. It has been a wonderful session for everyone. Over to you, Dr. Ravandle.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Karan. Well, it was indeed one of the finest sessions. And as a learner of law, I always like to participate and learn from the ones who are on the other side. And the best part of being into academics is that most of you were on this side and you got an opportunity to be on the other side. But in my case, I'm always on this side and I get to see your side, you changing one side and then to other side, because then you work as a coin because you know both the sides. If today's lecture needs to be summarized, there are 3 words and which I learned from all the panelists: process, procedure, and practice. Because if one has to coin this entire deliberation, then these are the 3 aspects which are rather the basis of what we call as administration of not law, but administration of justice. You introduced us to series of terms, like to begin with law, then object of law. Then came 2 important terms, one as change and then adaptability. Now, the word change and then adaptability was in the context of the present time, right? So herein, 2 justices become important, because the first one is Oliver Wendell Holmes, who says, I quote, "Life of law has not been logic, it has been an experience," I unquote. He made that statement in the context of lawmaking, the dynamism of law, its application, and the change it requires. And then comes former Chief Justice of India, Mr. Justice P.N. Bhagwati, who in Oleum gas leak disaster case rejected the application of one of the doctrine referred to strict liability. But those words are important herein. I quote, that legal system of a developing nation cannot subject itself to a distant rule which was developed at such a time when science and technology was not so developed, I unquote. So he anticipated, he said, law has to adapt to the change. So the word change and then adaptability, because we have coined law, we have made law for the administration of justice and no other thing. And it was so well put forward by all the panelists. And of course, it was well moderated by Mr. Karan. And then when you focused on the aspect of procedure, as you rightfully, when it started with Mr. Shobit, then Mr. Achyutan, because you focused on the aspect of procedure, And you directly, indirectly hit at that the procedure has to be just, fair and reasonable. And law always has looked into that it should not remain arbitrary, oppressive, or fanciful. So be it one side or the opponent, and accordingly what changes we see as pre-litigation mediation, then litigation, and then forthwith, as you rightfully pointed out, and then it really became easy for us to understand. And when it comes to, like, for example, why this new, I will not call it as new changes, I would not call it as transformation, rather life of law has been like this. It always adapts, it meets the requirements, expectation, interest of different interests. So accordingly it goes on, we study it, we inform it, and we try to bring those changes. Then came the most interesting, how practical aspects would be. And I really like that term when it was used by Mr. Saif. Well, processes haven't changed, practice has. And absolutely, because for example, I can say it as a learner of law, teaching hasn't stopped, it is continuing. Mode only had changed and we have adapted. So, you know, when we are talking about process, then procedure, and then we come and focus on the practice aspect. And it was so well elucidated by you. And what I like that Mr. Manish, you said that people don't have to forget when you get into the profession that on the other side, they also are the human beings. So please learn that, you know, means it has nothing to do with the mood or the mood swings or etc. But you need to be patient because the other side is patient provided you don't get impatient. So before law, what comes is the built up, the relation and your approach. So if you do it, most of the thing gets sorted. And if you see this, this goes very much with the first aspect of the topic, what was understanding pre-litigation mediation under New Commercial Codes Act. That has one context, but when we talk about the next shifting paradigm in criminal, civil and custom enforcement of IP, then both again talk about the practice and who practices. We practice it, I practice it, you practice it. So we also have to adapt. We cannot make law adapt all the time. We need to adapt to that. Herein, like, I remember these words. It was written on the wall of my school. Charity puts end to poverty, righteous conduct to misery, discretion to ignorance, and scrutiny to fear. So these words talk about law because law doesn't stand for anything else. Law does not take right or the wrong side. Law has the only side. It's not a coin. We cannot flip it. One day it becomes right and then other day it becomes wrong. It is not like that. We don't flip it as a coin, but right and wrong side that we present before the court. And this, when I was just figuring out, so in Sanskrit, as these words are taken from Chanakya's Arthashastra. So he says, Daridra Nashanam Danam, Shilam Durgati Nashanam, Ajnana Nashini Pradnya, Bhavana Bhaya Nashini. So he meant the same thing. He said that not just educated, he talked about those four aspects only, which I just read in English, that charity puts an end to poverty. But here in charity, I'm not seeing it as, you know, paying someone so that it takes away that poverty of somebody. No, the learners of law has to bring, innovate and has to bring different meanings before the court, and it takes away what was law then and what it becomes applicable. Righteous conduct, as you rightfully say, because in one of the point, Mr. Manish rightfully said, if you could nip it in the bud, do you really have to worry about the problem? Because if you could stop it there and there only with the help of customs, you don't have to work further. So precaution. So that's what it definitely talks about. So if you could talk about this aspect, then of course it takes about discretion to ignorance. Of course, what practice, how one would like to do. And what I liked about all of you, you all so focused and gave a wonderful advice to all the learners that as you get into the profession of law, please take this piece of advice which was given to you possibly by another intellectual, but a real mind, that yes, don't worry, things are better when you come this side. When you are that side, you think, whether it will happen, it will not happen. And as it is rightfully said, and I was good when I heard that, you know, what is the change norm is not the norm of law. So practice before the court of law. Thank you very much for bringing that clarity, because people have started feeling that the courts will just now behave, work in virtual way. I don't think so. But yes, one good thing which has happened, that yes, the courts which were confined to their limits now have come to our drawing rooms as well. So we are able to enjoy that part, and we have to give this benefit to COVID. So as I always say, and Dr. Mujumdar sir has been saying, COVID has to be seen as a teacher, because it has taught us new ways of life. And just look at the way we all are practicing, and nobody has stopped. Life goes on. So accordingly, when the last one comes, scrutiny to fear. And who brings that scrutiny? You as a professional of law who is on the other side, as a officer of the court, the judiciary, the judicial officer, etc. So it was, I must say, fantastic. And the panel discussion really went well, and we learned a lot. And it was more like a storytelling. I must tell you this. Nobody, I did not feel it is about law, because truly speaking, when I got into law, it was the most difficult thing I thought I have ever ventured into. And well, everybody knows I failed ETKT in the first year. Of course, I topped the university later, and the credit goes to me, of course, for failing as well as for winning. But yes, law has taught me that, law taught me you can do it. If you cannot do it, you only cannot do it. Law cannot be blamed for. So thank you very much. And it was a wonderful session, as it is rightfully said. Very well moderated by Mr. Karan.
Thank you, sir.
Kudos to you. Very well done. And Mr. Shobit, Mr. Achyutan, were the
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
We started with the topic, and of course, Mr. Saif and Mr. Manish, as we knew that this will come, and absolutely it was dot there, and we really enjoyed it. And thank you very much. And we look forward to more such sessions, and we definitely will do. And I could see other colleagues who were there into the first and the second session as a resource person, they also joined as attendees. That shows that, as you rightfully said, it's a knowledge. Everybody wants to have access to that. So credit goes to you for bringing this leap to us, leap 3 of the knowledge series on law, intellect, and property in association with Anand and Anand. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.